Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Venture Love podcast. So honored to have you here with me today. For our listeners, you'll definitely want to check out Elisabeth. Elisabeth is a doctor of pharmacy, a founder of a functional medicine practice, and the host of Thrive Mama, which I love. Her specialty is empowering busy working mamas who feel overwhelmed, fatigued, and short on time so they can be more present, gain work-life balance, lead healthy lifestyles. So super glad you're here. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here and just chat with you today and just get to know each other more and all that good stuff.
Yeah, super excited. So I thought we could get started and chat. So as we were chatting just before we started, I'm currently 27 weeks pregnant. This is my first pregnancy. All the feels, scary, excited. It's a roller coaster, as you know, and you mentioned you're a mama of two. So I thought we could start with maybe you sharing a bit about maybe your experience and your journey with being a mama, maybe how pregnancy was for you. And then also, I know we were talking about postpartum because it's not something you hear a ton about, right? You hear about prepping for labor and delivery, and you hear about prepping for the big day of pushing and baby.
Yeah.
But then, I think especially in America, and as I'm learning, there's not a ton of resources unless you're willing to research and dive deep and hire a doula and all the things. You don't get a ton of support. So I'll stop rambling, but I'd love to hear from your perspective, your story, share more about yourself so we can all get to know you a little bit better. And
Yeah. So my pregnancy journey, we'll start there. So I'm a mother of a 4-year-old little girl and a 2-year-old little girl, and they are very feisty, fiery, sweet young ladies. And they're the light of my life. They both are. And my pregnancy is physically, I was very healthy. However, with my first labor and delivery, I had decided to do an epidural. And, I was happy doing either natural, without being medicated, or having the epidural, or doing it with, just depending on how I felt. And what ended up happening to me was I immediately had what's called a spinal headache. The epidural failed, and once they injected the medication into my spine, the pain went away where it was supposed to, with the cramping and all of that through the labor pains, but my shoulders and my neck locked up.
Oh no.
And I mentioned to the anesthesiologist, I was like, hey, this is what's going on. Is this normal? And he assured me that everything would be okay. Well, I went through my entire labor with this excruciating pain. I mean, I honestly would have rather not have gone through that and done an all natural birth, non-medicated, any day. The pain on a scale of 1 to 10, it was over a 10.
Oh my God. Was it immediate? I have read a bit about this particular thing, and it's one of my, there's so many things that can go wrong at any given time. And I know it's a side effect. Did they warn you that this was a thing when I know you have to sign to get the
You have to sign a document saying that you understand the risks. And I was in the middle of labor pain, so I didn't thoroughly read the document, of course. And, I knew that there was a risk going in when you have an epidural. The pain was immediate for me, and it was just excruciating. So I keep telling my nurses, I keep telling the doctor, different healthcare providers coming into the room, like, this hurts so bad. And my husband, he's trying to be an advocate for me, and he's so supportive. And, I was in labor for 23 hours, and it was intense. And she also had to be vacuum extracted, which was very scary too. And I just remember like that intense pain coupled with being very scared for my child, because it was either that or an emergency C-section. I'm like, no, I've got this far pushing her. I'm going to get her out, and just really like set my mind and body to it. And of course had my husband here by my side. And when everything was all said and done, I mean, she was healthy, she was thriving, you know, everything checked out on her end. I go to get out of my hospital bed and go in the shower, and I couldn't lift my arms.
Oh gosh.
It was so painful. It was like my muscles were spazzing, but it almost felt like even my bones were breaking. It was just very excruciating. And I talked to, again, my husband, and I tell him my pain, and I tell the nurse, and she gets the anesthesiologist back in, and he's just ignoring me.
Really?
Really. He's ignoring my pain. He's saying everything's fine. I'm like, no, it's not. They gave me Ketorolac, which is an injectable NSAID like ibuprofen, but much, much more potent. I tried taking a Norco, which is an opioid medication, which didn't work. I tried one, and it didn't work. It just made me incredibly tired. And I was not able to care for my daughter those first moments of her being born. I couldn't hold her. I had to nurse her lying down. I was limited on the skin to skin, and it was really hard. And then I finally had a nurse who came in, listened to me about what I was experiencing, and she's like, we have to lay you down flat on the bed. If your pain goes away, we know that it's a spinal headache. And mind you, I'm freaking out because I'm scared to move at all, because I don't know what's going to happen to my body.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay. So she does it, and lo and behold, my pain was gone. So I'm like forever grateful for her, because she actually listened to me. And I had to, if they call it a blood patch, I'm not sure if you read anything about that, with helping heal from a spinal headache. So I had that done, and they have to put an epidural needle back in, but they inject your own blood back into your spine to allow for clotting to occur in the base of your spinal cord, which is where that typically occurs. And my headache immediately dissipated within a few minutes. Yeah. It was such an intense experience. And then a few days later, it came back. And I had to go back and do the same thing. And, they put me on a migraine medication as well, because it contained caffeine, and caffeine helps with spinal headaches. So they just wanted me to try it and see. But I will be honest with you, it made me feel like I was drunk. And again, I couldn't care for my child. I'm like, I can't pick her up when I can barely walk.
Yeah.
And I'm so thankful my husband was able to be home with us for those first couple weeks, but it was just, yeah, intense, crazy. I'm like, I know that this isn't just something that's happening to me. I know that this is guaranteed happen to other women, not being listened to, their pain being ignored during labor, and then also like that inability to bond with your newborn baby, which then led me to become incredibly anxious. And I went into a postpartum anxiety, which kind of morphed into, I would say, like a very mild depression. And it lasted a year, but I didn't really know that I had it. I mean, I was waking up in a panic, when I was sleeping, which I had insomnia pretty bad. I wasn't sleeping very well. thinking that something was wrong with her. And I just remember telling my husband I was trying to get her dressed one day, and like, I just can't do this. I'm in tears. I'm like, I'm just not a good enough mom. And he's like, are you okay? Do we need to, do we need to get you help? And I'm like, oh my gosh. And that kind of was like a little light bulb that went off. I'm like, okay, something's going on here with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up connecting with a family member who just had a baby, and just talking with her and having that community support helped get me kind of out of that heaviness that I was in.
Yeah.
So
man.
it's just crazy.
Yeah, you went through so much.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, so many questions were racing as you were explaining your journey. And just that little bit, I mean, I can imagine. I mean, I know for myself and for any other first time mom, and was this your first baby?
This is my first, yeah.
Oh my gosh. It just sounds so traumatic. And I can imagine, I'm sure going into labor and delivery, it's traumatic regardless. I don't think you can do, no matter how much training or reading or preparing, and I feel like I've done a ton of it, I don't think you can ever do enough of it or ever feel as prepared. And then for all these things to happen,
yeah, it was a lot. And being new parents, and like you said, you don't know what to expect.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like a huge portion of why I'm doing what I do today with women in my business. Is I talk a lot about being your own advocate, and also finding someone else who can be an advocate for you, especially in the healthcare setting. It is so important, because you don't know what quality of a provider you're going to get.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to have someone to lift you up and support you, who knows your needs and your wants, especially during such a vulnerable and intense experience in a woman's life, is huge. And that's another reason too why I'm a big supporter of midwives and doulas, because they help you with your birth plan and really sticking to what it is you want for your labor and delivery.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. It sounds so intense. And I mean, for myself personally speaking, I've thought about, I'm not good with pain. I don't think anyone is. And so I already have it in the back of my mind that I do want an epidural. I see nothing wrong with that, but it is scary knowing that there are so many possibilities, and I know every woman's body is different and everyone reacts to things differently. But yeah, I mean, hearing you say that too, it makes me question, like, well, do I really want to do this? Like, do I really want to put myself at risk? I guess thinking back, and I know life is life, we can never go back, but if you could do anything differently, or, to have things turn out a little bit better or more in your favor, or what would you recommend to maybe someone listening who's maybe going through the same kind of things? And
so that's a hard question, because like you mentioned, every woman, everyone's pain level and pain tolerance is different. If I had to go back, I would have encouraged myself not to do it. And I say that because I delivered my second daughter non-medicated, naturally, got into those positions that I needed, but I had a totally different birth team. So they were, not to say that the nurses that I had before weren't great, but because they listened, they're like, okay, you want this epidural. And that was my decision, right?
Yeah.
But with my other team, with my second daughter, I told them my story. I told them what happened. They're like, well, we're here to enable you to do those things. And they got me into just different birthing positions. They got me on the yoga ball and like doing all these different things to help support that process. Whereas I wasn't guided as much with my first. So I think my piece of advice is to know your birth team. If there's any way for you to like go into the hospital and meet some of those nurses and then talk about your birth plan, not only with your doctor, but with the nurses as well, to see, you know, if you're a right fit for each other. I think that's important. You don't know who you're going to get, but I think that's a huge part of feeling confident in your decision, no matter which way you go. So I guess that would be my advice.
Yeah,
for other mamas. Yeah,
that's definitely good advice. And I recently booked my my birth doula, which I'm already, the baby's not even here. I'm not even I'm more than halfway through the pregnancy, but I already feel a little bit of a weight lifted off my shoulders. And I know giving birth is ultimately gonna end up being me, right? But I do agree that having the right support team around you to help advocate for you, and like you said, it's probably, I just envision, I haven't had kids before, but I've watched a bajillion YouTube birth videos. I just can't help myself, and everyone's like, stop watching, those are not good to watch, but I can't help it. But I've learned a ton, and so I see already the benefit of having loving, caring, educated support team around you during one of your most vulnerable times ever. I can imagine. Yeah. So I think that's great. That was actually one of my questions for you was, well, I know you've got 2 kiddos. So how was the second experience? It sounds like that was, and you were able to do it. I mean, I know women have done this a bajillion years without pain medication, and you did it. And how did you feel afterwards, looking and comparing? And I'm sure they were so different from each other.
They were totally different experiences. And with my second, I felt like $1 million. I mean, you quickly forget the pain that's involved. And I was just like, I was beaming. I was so happy. I was so proud of myself. I was proud of like my husband. I was proud of my little girl. I'm like, look at us, you know, just, it was so awesome. I was up moving around the room. She was really good at nursing. She was, you know, a good sleeper. I was able to have that skin to skin contact with her. And I felt on top of the world. It was amazing. So like for me, having that contrast to very, very different experiences, in my personal opinion, I encourage women to try to do it without medications. As long as there's no harm being done to mama or baby, if there's a way for you to power through it and just remember, like, you've got this, I support that so much. And you know, I felt so good and didn't have that anxiety or depression at all. Part of that I attribute to the labor and delivery experience, but I also decided after I had my first was to do more research in prenatal care. So I didn't take an omega-3 product or really incorporate much fish when I was pregnant with my first, because I got really scared of the mercury content in different types of fish. So I ended up starting an omega-3 with my prenatal vitamin, but also having fish every now and then with my second baby. And I just actually got off of a interview for my podcast with the food doula. Her name is Lindsay Taylor. And we were talking about how crucial omega-3s are, not only for pregnancy and nourishing your body and baby, but for helping support your mood and preventing postpartum anxiety and depression. So I think that definitely helps. And you kind of go in obviously knowing a little bit more about like the birth experience, what to expect after with baby. So I think I was more prepared with like meal prep and, you know, having more confidence in myself too. So that's just a little side note. And like something to think about for mamas, for yourself. Make sure that you are keeping your body nourished with the right types of foods is so important.
I love that you mentioned that. My husband, he's actually from Southern Italy. And so
Oh,
normally I don't, before we met, I just wouldn't consume a ton of fish. But during this pregnancy, he's like, you got to eat more fish. And it's funny that he just knows that they're surrounded by water and seafood, and it's that constant reminder. So I'm thankful for him to constantly remind me to consume more of that. But I think that's such a good thing to note, that it's not just, I know sometimes we think a lot of things are external, but it's so important, especially when you're pregnant, because your body is changing every day and you need all of these nutrients and minerals, and it is kind of scary and being pregnant, because you hear so many different things from so many different people. I mean, between my OB and other mamas that I've met, and they're like, oh, this is great. Coffee's great. Coffee's not great. This is good.
I know.
Not good. This is so you're like, wait a minute. What do I do? Like, for instance, in the beginning of my pregnancy, I was dying for like a hot bath. Like, just, I was craving a hot bath. And my OB was like, well, not too hot. Make sure it's lukewarm. And you're like, well, what kind of benefit am I going to get from a lukewarm bath? But that's definitely such great advice, for sure. Consuming more fish and nourishing your body. I love that I feel for your first, labor and delivery, that it was so difficult and traumatic, but I love that you had such a beautiful second experience with your baby girl. And it sounds like a lot of the things maybe that you were experiencing with the first, you were able to educate and nourish yourself so much more with the second. So it was just such a much more pleasant experience, which I love. There's a billion questions I'd love to ask you. Obviously you're a mom, so you have way more experience than I do. But in terms of, I guess aside from nutrition, is there anything else that you would recommend to new mamas or, soon to be mamas on just the biggest highlights that you, looking back, you're like, oh, if I do this again, I'm absolutely doing this, or I'm absolutely saying no to that, which sounds like maybe it's an epidural, but what else would that be for you? Or maybe in terms of even managing, balancing your emotions. I know you mentioned, consuming fish helped, but is there anything else that you noticed in your journey to becoming a mama that really did help and support you?
So aside from nutrition, which was a game changer for me, I mean, I considered myself relatively healthy, but I definitely had room for improvement. I would say really initiating acts of self-care for yourself. So with my first, for example, I was so nervous to even like take a shower. I would wait till, my husband got home, and I would take days in between showering. And I know that sounds silly, but that that is so important for like not only self-care, it's more self-maintenance, but just feeling like a human. I don't know if that
after baby, is that what you're saying? After baby came?
After baby, yeah. After baby. So with my second, I was more confident in letting her sit in her bouncer and be in the shower, be in the bathroom with me while I showered. And she started crying, it's okay. You know what I mean? So just doing like that simple thing. I know I say self-care, which really it's more self-maintenance, but when you're a new mom, sometimes just that warm shower and feeling that independence from your baby is a blessing because you are literally attached to each other so much. And also I would say I started moving my body more too. So because I had this spinal headache, it made it difficult for me to like get back into the swing of things. I was scared to lift any weights. I was a little nervous about how intense I could get on my workouts. With my second born, I felt more comfortable with, getting outside and taking a walk. And obviously she'd come with me and just being more open to different types of movement rather than being so focused solely on, lifting weights and cardio and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So, having those mindset shifts helped me a lot with my healing journey. And also, I think helped with not falling into that postpartum anxiety as well. And then meal prepping was huge too. I didn't really do that before. And with Olivia, she's my second born, I did months worth of meal prep because I had to go back to work and be full time. So I'm like, you know what? It would be so helpful if I did this for my entire family, not only myself, but for everybody.
That's awesome. I keep hearing that now when every mom I talk to and doula and whoever else, I'm like, what advice do you have for me? And they're like, meal prep, freeze your meals. You're not going to want to cook. That's the last thing you're going to want to do when baby's here. So that's such great advice. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I feel like there's a million things I could ask of you. In terms of listeners that want to learn more about you and want to work with you, how can they find you? How can they connect with you?
Sure. So I hang out on Instagram and Facebook, and my handle is at Elisabeth Wygant Wellness, and I'm Elisabeth with an S. And I also have my podcast, Thrive Mama, where you can, get more tips and tricks on health and wellness topics. Self-love is something that I've been doing a lot of interviews on and just talking a lot about. So you can check me out there too.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here today. And I know the listeners, hopefully a lot of them are mamas to be, or maybe, hoping to one day be a mama, and they'll learn so much from your experience and your vulnerability and you sharing, your journey with us. So I appreciate it. And I thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you for having me.
Of course.